My name is James. I'm an educator, I'm a learner, I'm a connector, and I'm a father. Over the next couple of days, you're going to be asked to prototype, to design, to create, to build. And I want to share with you why it's necessary to do these things. But I do have a confession to make before I tell you this. Now, you're going to have an opportunity. It's going to come in your mind to make or not to make. That is the question. But maybe the question should be, why make? But like I said, I have a confession. I'm not a maker. Now, my father, he is a maker. James Campbell Sr., he has the ability to see an idea in his head, sketch it out, and bring it to life. This is him on top of the roof of his home that he played a part in building recently. Now, I said that I'm not a maker. And it's not that I don't desire to be a maker, it's just that I struggle to be a maker. And recently I attempted to try to develop that muscle for making, and the washing machine broke down at the house. And I said, I'm gonna fix this. So I flooded the kitchen twice, and after the second time, I actually got everything screwed back in, and it worked for a little bit, but then we had to call in the repair guy. So I struggle with that. Now my hope is this, is that maker gene actually jumps a generation so that my struggles don't impact my children. I hope that they are natural makers and they just enjoy it, they eat it up. So much so that they'll go to their grandfather and say, show me the ways of the maker and I will finish what you started. So that's my hope. Now, why is it necessary for us to develop a maker mindset, to become makers, to get involved in this maker movement? If James struggles with making, and I limit my students, then I take away their ability to learn. Now, I'm not a math teacher, but I do understand a little bit about diameter and circumference. And I heard once this quote, that he who controls the diameter of your thinking controls the circumference of your activities. So sometimes we as teachers, we limit our students' abilities based upon maybe our limited knowledge or the limited time that we have, and so we keep them from growing. So if I'm not a maker and I say, you know what, we're not going to touch that because I can't do it, then I limit my students. But imagine if I allow my students to share in that diameter and they're actually able to grow the circumference of that circle. How much more we'll learn as a class, as a community. So as teachers, I think making is important because we can inspire our students to make an impact. Now, I've been at Mount Vernon, this will be my 6th year in the fall, and I've seen a lot of examples of when our students have actually made impact because we've given them space and time to be makers, to be design thinkers. And a couple of those activities, those examples. 2 years ago, or roughly 2 years ago, our art students were allowed to, they were approached by the Boys and Girls Club. And the Boys and Girls Club in Atlanta, close to Georgia Tech, they wanted this mural to be created. And so they approached Hank Kunath, our art teacher, and he brought out a group of students. And they actually surveyed this area. They looked through, they measured, and they came back to school and they sketched out what this mural might look like. And after that, they actually went back to the executive director and they pitched this idea to him. And after some negotiations, they decided, okay, let's make this happen. Now, they created this wonderful mural, and when you walk into the Boys and Girls Club, it says, "Great futures start here." The impact. Imagine as an 8-year-old kid, you walk through those doors, and you see that sign, "Great futures start here," and you see that you have the potential to be a doctor, the potential to be a lawyer, a potential to go to Georgia Tech, a potential to go to Morehouse College. That's impact. And imagine these kids 30 years from now, 40 years from now, bringing their children in, or maybe their grandchildren, and say, you know what? I helped create this. So if we inspire our students, they can actually start making impact. Another example, about 4 years ago, we worked on this poverty project. And many of our students, they had assumption about homeless people. And you heard tonight about some of the homeless people in our communities. Well, with this poverty project, we were connected with this group called Mad Housers. Mad Housers, they actually go out and build shelters for individuals that are homeless. And we actually took our students into the woods of Atlanta because normally you don't see these shelters. They're not open, they're not easily accessible, but we went into the woods and we met a gentleman by the name of Jared. Now, Jared, he had been homeless for quite some time. And the students were asking him questions, and they were observing the shelter that he was living in. And they noticed that he had solar panels hooked up. And these solar panels were generating energy that actually allowed his radio to work. And they noticed that he has these computers in there, and he was working on the computers. And they realized that the solar panels were also creating light. And Jared shared his story. He had come from the Boston area. He had spent some time at MIT. And he came to Atlanta because he had a business opportunity that fell short. So he ended up being homeless. So that changed the perspective of our students. Now, some of our students, they came back and actually built some of the a shelter on the left-hand side that you see. These are the typical shelters that Madhousers build. But many of them actually started prototyping a new way, a more economically efficient way to actually build these shelters. So they were on fire with this idea. Now, I know what you're thinking. You guys have this wonderful maker space. Well, this was 4 years ago, so we didn't have a maker space. We just had an art room. We had some saws. We had some hammers. We had some nails. So we didn't allow the limitations of not having a maker space to prevent our students from being makers. Another example, one of my final examples, Brittany and Emmy. Now, to know Brittany and Emmy, they are always bundles of sunshine, always smiles. As ninth graders, it was great to have them in class because you know whether they receive an F on a paper or an A on a paper, they're always going to be cordial and smiling. Well, these young ladies, through our eye project, for the past 2 years, they were curious about people who suffered with hearing impairments. How many of us have ever been driving down the street and you're listening to your music, you have your Starbucks in your hand, and you hear that siren go off? And you panic for a moment because you don't know where it's coming from. And then you either move to the left or you move to the right to get out of the way. Now imagine if you can't hear that siren because you have a hearing impairment. These young ladies wanted to try to come up with a solution to solve that. Now there was a family friend who had a hearing impairment and she had children. And so they were able to interview her, and they actually brought her to the school and they allowed the other students to hear her story. And these young ladies spent 2 years, first year just designing what it might look like to actually create this hearing wheel. And then this past year, they developed it. And you notice on the left-hand side, this is what the hearing wheel looks like. And on the right-hand side, they actually backed their BMW up to the school. And they actually allowed us to prototype. Now, I sat in initially, and I was super excited because I was sitting in a BMW. And this is probably like the only time in my life I was going to be sitting in a BMW. But after that moment of me just feeling good about myself because I'm sitting in this car, I put the muffs on, soundproof earmuffs, and I couldn't hear anything. So I was, for that moment in time, able to empathize with someone who might have a hearing impairment. And then I flipped the switch, and the siren went off, and it generated a signal for the steering wheel to turn, or the lights to turn on. So these young ladies have dedicated 2 years of their life working on this. Now, in the third year, they're actually going to work on developing a patent for this. So, given the space, given the time, they were able to create something that's going to be meaningful and impactful to hopefully generations to come. So, when you're met with that question of to make or not to make, always make. And when you're met with that question of why, remember by allowing your students or allowing yourself to make, then you can inspire and impact others. Thank you.